Cryptography is all about secret keys that need high-quality entropy to be truly random. NetRandom from Whitewood Security delivers pure quantum entropy on demand across the entire data center and out to the cloud. Think NTP, but for quantum entropy. Inoculate your applications from making weak crypto keys all without having to change a line of code. Visit getnetrandom.com to learn how you can take control of your entropy supply and ensure crypto security today. Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW. Onapsis is the leading provider of solutions to protect ERP systems from cyber attacks. Customers can secure their SAP and Oracle business-critical platforms from espionage, sabotage, and financial fraud risks. Visit them on the web at onapsis.com. The SANS Institute, the most trusted source for computer security certification training and research. Visit SANS.org to explore their full curriculum and latest training offerings. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. We did several webcasts this year. If you happen to have missed one of those webcasts on some fantastic topics from our sponsors, Onapsis and Signal Sciences and others that were mentioned in this role right here, in collaboration with folks from Security Weekly. I know Larry did one with Pony Express as well, which went over very well. If you missed one, you can go to securityweekly.com/on-demand. There are actually 4 webcasts that you can register for and watch if you happen to miss them and didn't have the opportunity to register for. So go check those out and let us know if those are topics that you're interested in. For 2018, we've identified yet another series of on-demand webcasts that we're choosing the 6 or 7-ish topics throughout 2018 that we feel are relevant to, well, both our sponsors and want to make sure that those are relevant to the security community as well. I think Michael Santarcangelo really put it kind of in perspective for myself and many of us here at Security Weekly and said, really Security Weekly is one of those bridges between industry and the community. And I'm like, wow, we've been that for a long time. We just never articulated it that way. And so I thought that was really great. In that light, I just want to maybe go over some of those topics that we'll be doing in 2018 as part of our on-demand series. Maybe those are the right topics. Maybe they're not. Maybe we have some thoughts. We can kind of tease some of that content and talk about those. Maybe we won't get to all 6, but certainly some of those topics that we'll be talking about next year. Now, the first one is penetration testing. Every time I say that, Jeff rolls his eyes, which is fantastic. Like, I just love saying it so I can see Jeff roll his eyes and be like, So John and I John Strand and I are slated to do one that we'll probably record next week that we'll be releasing in January and February as our first in this on-demand series. And I'm kind of touting this as the state of a topic, so the state of penetration testing. I really want to, talk with John about what works, what doesn't, what problems are we trying to solve, what are the best ways to solve those in the light of penetration testing. So I'll throw it out to our illustrious panel.
So are you inviting me to participate in the webinar?
That'd be fantastic. Actually, that would be.
Wait, are we doing a PCI one?
We can do a PCI one as well. Sure. I mean, if we think it fits, if our listeners think it fits, if our sponsors think, if we all can, agree that it fits, sure.
I want to see a webcast as you as the moderator and Jeff and Jack for PCI.
For PCI. And then John and Jeff and myself on pen testing. So let's talk about the state of pen testing. I mean, episode 500, I can't say that I planned it this way. I was kind of just like, well, it was very much based on our on-demand series, right?
You can say you planned it this way. It would be a lie.
Well, yeah, it would be a lie. So basically, I was like, well, we've got all these people coming in studio for basically to celebrate our episode 500. And I'm like, everyone's got some pretty good opinions, whether they're for pen testing, against pen testing. Like, pen testing would be a great topic. Like, that's literally how much thought I put into that. The feedback that we've gotten from our audience is like, that was some awesome content on pen testing. So my question to the panel today is it still a topic, and what's changed since episode 500 that we could bring to our audience in January and February?
Short answer:
Nothing.
yes, and it changes every day.
So like I say, it changes often.
I
think,
say nothing, but go ahead.
And Jeff's saying it hasn't changed, so that's interesting. There's still a difference of opinion, which I love. I love that we each have our unique point of view on these issues.
I think that the state of pen testing is really divided, because the state of pen testing for many people is shitty, commoditized, bottom basement, bottom price, the cheapest possible pen test that makes us look good, and we can do the checkbox.
Yep. It's kind of like security and compliance,
general,
Jack, right? It's what you make of it, right?
It is. And so I think that for a lot of people, the state of pen testing is shit.
Yeah.
And then there are people that engage organizations, not to pander to the sponsors, but to that hire Larry or hire Black Hills or hire our friend Trusted Sec or Lars or right. And what they get is not just a commodity product, but it's people who actually care about them improving. They write reports, which report writing is painful, but they're like, hey, in your environment, do this really next year. I don't want to find this, and actually care. And so I think there's a real split. And unfortunately, the commodity part, I think, really is the state of pen testing. And unfortunately, the people that give a shit and are willing to pay for it and are willing to put the effort into it are not the broader state of pen testing.
Jeff, are we?
So
hold on, Jeff. I just want to go to Jeff for a second. Are we mitigating business risk with pen testing? Does it, in your mind, accomplish that goal?
With the few exceptions of the companies that hire the InGuardians and the Black Hills, I would say no, not in the slightest.
And I think Joff, I know you want to answer this. I think that's kind of a loaded question. I think by pen testing, are we mitigating business risk? No. By pen testing, we are not mitigating business risk. By resolving the issues found in the pen test, begin to start mitigating business risk.
Well said.
Because every pen test, even though it may say otherwise in your SOW, is best effort.
Joff?
Yeah, so I want to chime in because I think there's been considerable maturing in the industry as overall status. Certainly from the operating system technology, the micro-virtualization technology that's coming out. The defenses are much better, and I'm actually encouraged for the companies like ourselves who are not the script kiddie pen testers. They're not the pen testers that are just running a vulnerability scan. The people that are in that category should be frightened about what's happening. The people that actually have a quality product, who are really putting in great effort, I think still have a career future. So I think we're going to see a distinct evolution, almost a survival of the fittest kind of evolution that's going to occur here in the next year or so. And I'm not disappointed that that's going to happen. I think it's important that it happens. I don't support, endorse, or in any way understand these companies that are just running a vulnerability scanner and sticking a logo on it and calling it a pen test. It actually bothers me greatly, and I would be more than happy to see those people get some pressure to just do better. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, one of the other issues that I've identified this year, and I think a lot of us have latched onto, and I think one of our sponsors, Javelin Networks, who did a bunch of sponsored activity with us, I think coined it very, very well. And they said that Active Directory is insecure by design.
Yes.
And that very much relates to our conversation on pen testing, but also kind of relates to the elephant in the room to all of these enterprises that have implemented Active Directory and either haven't recognized it as a major security problem, or they have, and they don't have the right process, tools, and techniques in order to fix it and make it less of a threat to the organization.
But we've learned from Javelin that it's not fixable.
it is fixable if you pay attention to it. Much like all the things that we've identified as security issues, if you pay attention to them, you can have processes, tools, and techniques that can work towards fixing the problem. I think the problem is where many enterprises don't list that as like, oh, this is a problem that I have. That's my concern. When we have a big issue like this, if our security community is not recognizing it as a problem, industry can't come in and help, and whether that's help in education or whether that's help in buying products. I mean, we've all seen like, yeah, I know I have this problem. Yeah, I know I could solve it myself, but like that solution can really help me solve that problem. And those are the ones that we want to highlight for our audience.
I would like to, believe it or not, have a contrarian point of view.
No,
I think that
get out.
I think that even the cheap commodity pen tests actually do substantially address and mitigate a critical business risk, and that risk is non-compliance. Mm-hmm. It's not addressing security concerns per se, but non-compliance. I think it was Josh Corman that first said it in some paraphrasing him many years ago. It's like, I might get hacked, but I will get audited.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is a business risk of non-compliance. In PCI, it has a set of there are things that will happen. It will cost you more to process credit cards. Yep. So there's a value in shitty pen tests. However, the value is limited. The value is limited, and it depends on what your goals are. It comes back to you do the bare minimum, and there is business risk to not doing the bare minimum. But we've got to understand those business risks. We've got to understand the motivators. And if your concern is that the cost of processing credit cards is going to go up by 0.13%, that's huge, right? And that needs to be addressed. But I don't know that everybody understands the value of, well, if we spend a bit more, we can not only be compliant, we can actually be more secure. And I think that is happening, or we're getting there. I mean, the question that I would say ask is, imagine that the PCI Council decides tomorrow to remove the requirement for a penetration test.
Oh, fuck.
How many pen testers would be pen testers in a couple of months? And those that deliver value, I hope, would survive because they're delivering value beyond the minimum required value.
Well, so ballpark, Larry or Joff, what percentage of your customers have hired you or originally hired you because of a compliance regulatory requirement? Ballpark.
I would say and I'm maybe speaking out of turn, the ballpark that has asked us specifically to target PCI is probably less than 10%.
Mm-hmm. Joff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in line with Larry. I think not everybody reveals this. Some of them don't. They keep it close to the chest. But I don't think we're a good sample, though. You're talking to InGuardians and Black Hills Information Security. Right. And frankly, we do have some of the best customers in the world. And, we're proud of that, obviously. But that means our sample of people asking us for pen tests for compliance reasons is probably much, much less than many of the other companies out there. So I'd like to see the terminology change, to be honest, for people to actually say, you know what, I am a vulnerability scanning and delivery company. I'm not a pen testing company. I mean, we need a little bit of delineation here.
I want to ask the question in this way, Larry and Joff specifically. Yeah. How much would your findings reduce if the organizations you pen tested were to address all of the Active Directory security issues?
Oh, I don't like that question.
So
that means it was the right question.
I would like some more clarity. What type of test? Would you like an internet-facing test? Would you like a test, assume compromise, like an internal type of thing.
I want a test that's going to help me address business risk and reduce the threats against my organization. You tell me.
So,
Okay.
Paul, if I may.
you may.
I love whining the crank on Jeff on this issue.
Let's take a step further back.
And I have some good. I think I have some answers for you.
Because what we're beating around the bush on is really what is a pen test, and we talked about this on episode 500, where back in the day, in the beginning, a pen test was really a glorified vulnerability assessment. We want to know where we're vulnerable because we've been operating for a while with computers and networks.
We don't know where
and now
we're
we've
vulnerable.
plugged into the internet,
Yeah.
so we've got this great unknown, attack vector that we need to know about. And that was fine for a while, but and we talked about this on 500, and pen testing the way it should be today in 2017 should really be emulating the threat. It should really be a live fire test. I was talking to somebody in my travels this year about I would love to see PCI not have pen testing be a requirement the way it is, but actually somehow tie it to the annual incident response test. The pen test, and there's different types of reasons why you do a pen test. One of which would be how well do your defenses work, and how well do you do at detecting that something is happening?
Hey, we might be having a pen test the next sometime between now and the next 6 months. Find them.
Find them, yeah.
Right.
That's a great reason to do a pen test. Rarely is that the reason why it's done
No,
for the masses.
Yep. We highly encourage that anytime we do a pen test, in that don't tell your SOC.
Right.
Or tell the management of the SOC, but don't tell the general staff, in that let them find us.
Well, and
Challenge accepted.
we were
I think
talking.
that underscores some of the fundamental issues that most enterprises have with the inability to have insights into the endpoint, inability to protect Active Directory in many of the topics that we talk about. Also, I think one of the other issues for me is the inability for your SOC to have contextualized information about your environment. In other words, I see something bad, but I don't understand what it is, and I don't understand the impact.
Yes.
And that's, now we're starting to go off of Active Directory and start talking about one of those other real problems that enterprises have today.
But I would
indicators of compromise and incident response.
I would still argue that definitely applies to Active Directory. And I'm thinking about some of those that question, and some arguments about phrasing is one. If we're looking at that from an external perspective, and even external is a little bit mushy now. If you bring O365 into the mix, tied to your Active Directory, then it's a different game changer. And how do you monitor stuff from O365 to have that contextualization of what's happening to external resources that are connected to your internal?
But now is it an identity management and authorization and authentication problem as much as it is an Active Directory problem?
I would agree that yes, it
That's
is.
one of my other big issues.
Or is it a test of your third parties and your providers?
Yes.
And
Right.
and you
immediately how you are utilizing your third parties from a security perspective.
Right.
Look! I have to jump in and make a comment. I mean, so Active Directory is an incredibly rich source of information, right? For both good and for both bad, right? When we get inside of a network, Active Directory, from a pen tester perspective, is incredibly useful, right? We can enumerate all kinds of things about the environment, and this is what Paul is alluding to. But I think it speaks to the fact that the industry has to, from a defensive perspective, lean more and more to profiling anomaly detection, profiling what is good Active Directory queries, what is normal operational traffic versus what is extremely, out of band, high levels of Active Directory traffic that looks a lot more like reconnaissance. And this is the thing we're not seeing a lot yet in the industry. And this is why pen testers, especially on the internal networks, are getting an incredible amount of traction out of the information they can glean from the Active Directory, because there's basically no controls around it.
Right. And Joff, to dovetail a little bit of that, we don't have a lot of controls, we don't have a lot of insight, and we don't have a lot of knowledge as to what looks normal and what doesn't. in that in very many cases, one of our guys that's been with us for 2+ years, at his 2+ years in Guardians, doing that assumed breach scenario, the internal test, he's publicly stated to us and to others, he says, I've been here 2 years and I've yet to launch a single exploit. Right. I've said this before, woohoo, Tyler, you go. I mean, he hasn't launched a single exploit. He's lived off the land. He's used built-in tools. And what does the footprint of the use of those built-in tools that Active Directory and the Microsoft environment grant us from an information perspective and the ability to interact? And what does the footprint of those look like when they are used improperly?
Right. We need to be careful, though, because Active Directory is not bad. Active Directory is not evil.
No,
it's an incredibly useful source of information.
Exactly.
Just because it's being used for malfeasance doesn't mean that it's bad. It is holding these environments together for very positive, productive reasons.
So, is it more of the identity and access management problem? Is kind of what I'm latching onto, and I think we looked at that like security when we thought of a mainframe back in the day. Was all about assigning users roles and restricting access to data. It sounds like we've gotten so far away from that in technology today that when we are plopped into an environment, we're so overwhelmed with the complexity that we're just like, well, users have access to anything. But now there's a set of companies out there and a set of strategies that can say, well, you can reel the reins in on that if you do things like privileged identity management or identity and access management. Do we need to get back to that as a more fundamental issue to say, yes, when you're in our environment, an attacker is really, in essence, taking advantage of someone's identity and taking advantage of what they shouldn't have access to rather than restricting that identity to having access to what Jeff was saying in an earlier segment, to what data they only should have access to.
And I think that is very much the case. I think they should, but I think they need to do that to the nth degree. If Larry, the common scenario is lateral movement. If I am able to compromise Paul's credentials, and Paul is now an authenticated user, which workstations can Paul join as an authenticated user?
What does my identity have access to?
Right. Every one of them. But in reality, what should it be? It should be you have access to your machine, and you have maybe one or two others in your department as a backup, and you should have a couple in the library,
and maybe
the
I have
research
access
library.
to that application and maybe that data. And that's
and that lateral movement, you need to turn that down to like not 0. This one goes to 11. You need to turn that down not to 0, but to like 0.01.
You could almost say that even if you do that, though, Larry, if you compromise the right users, you're still going to have access to the data that could then kind of be the end of that organization.
Right, but now you have to get the right user, and that right user is like, it's not shooting fish in a barrel, it's shooting fish in a pond and just firing randomly. So the chances of that happening are significantly less.
And I think one of the strategies we've talked about is to make it more difficult for the attacker so that you increase your visibility as an attacker to achieve your end goal, and you're kind of decreasing that time to detection.
But
wind the crank, Jeff.
We could do this. This could be the whole segment, and we won't get around to the other topics. A lot of what we're talking about from the Guardians, Black Hills, sort of the elite level pen testing perspective, really there's only a handful of companies in the grand scheme of things out there that are mature enough to need that. We're talking about Active Directory. Generically, I think we could lump it into vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities.
I call them more exposures than vulnerabilities.
Well,
but
I was going to qualify vulnerabilities, not just bugs, but just features. Just the way things work.
I have like 6 or 7 I identify in the talk.
After we had our episode a couple weeks ago, where we were asking for the feedback from the Sands Pentest Hackfest, I got quite a bit of feedback from a couple different people. I hope Ed didn't watch that episode, but. One person I was talking to was saying, basically what I was saying is most pen testing firms that I've been exposed to as a PCI consultant over the past 10 years or so, most of what they did in terms of results you could have walked in and after an hour conversation, tell us your architecture, tell us your topology, tell us your business operations.
Came to the same findings.
You could have pretty much told them what the problems were going to be in an hour.
Yeah.
And this one person that was talking to me was like, yeah, we're trying to do that. You know, pen testing in an hour. We'll give you the same results. They do a little bit of testing. They do some stuff, technical stuff. But, I mean, I remember when I used to do pen testing, by the time we were done interviewing the customer or having that kickoff meeting, we had a pretty good idea of what we were going to do.
Yep.
And
That's still the case, by the way.
Yes.
And that doesn't comfort me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, for all the pen testing companies out there beyond you guys, how often do you as a pen tester, tell your customer, hey, before we get started, here's 20 things that you should make sure that you're on top of, because it's the 20 things that we try that we usually succeed at. Like, we've had how many interviews with people saying, oh, the top 5 ways that we break in are the same things that are the way we break in.
Jack, hold on, wait,
not
no,
even
Jack,
20.
I have a question for you.
It's 5.
Can you replace
Josh Jabra's? It's like, done. We're done here.
Jack, can you replace vulnerability management with threat modeling? That's basically what Jeff is saying.
You got
Having
to
worked for a vulnerability,
we can have a great discussion with some people,
discussion.
because there's an argument to be made that like asset-based defense is dumb. You need systemic defenses, but the flip side is if you don't know what you've got, how do you build great? How do you build secure
systemic? Yeah, right. You can't do the threat modeling unless you know what you have.
One of the things that, as we've been talking about, like Active Directory and other things that came back to me is I started out as a manager, not a technology manager, but a department manager, using Unix-based systems with specific applications, a suite of applications designed for running auto industry stuff, car dealerships. And we had a level of granular control that was amazing. If you worked in the parts department, you could do these things. If you were new in the parts department, you could do these things, but not the manager level stuff. You sure didn't see the accounting or payroll or anything. The just stunning granular level of control that we had with, the bespoke Unix-based stuff was amazing. And then we started rolling out PCs, and my first reaction was, what a pile of shit. I can do anything I want with these things. And the first things I started discovering were like the terminal emulators, 3270 emulators. Well, a 3270 terminal can only do specific things. An emulator can do whatever it can emulate, and now the world's wide open. So advanced decades, we're fucked.
Joe is still on the line. And Joe, I know you have a lot of experience working in the government as well. And when we talk about this topic in this context, I feel like the military and government almost has an advantage in they've been doing data classification for some time. Does that give the military and government an advantage, Joe? The fact that they can classify their data and really define who has access to it and who shouldn't? Does that give them an advantage? And can we learn from that in the enterprise?
Yes and no. And the reason I say that is if we learned one thing from the Snowden leak, it is that overclassification is sometimes used, I'm afraid to use the term, but as a weapon. So do they know about data classification? Absolutely. Do they do it appropriately? Not always. Sometimes it's just a matter of keeping one program or another from seeing your files, for example. So with regards to this, I mean, to a degree, yes, but to a degree, no. I hate to default to this, but it really boils down to it's all about the implementation.
Yeah, well, I think that's Jack's point as well. He's like, yeah, when we had all these Linux systems with terminals, like we were good. When we had a paper-based
before
system.
Linux.
No, this is Unix.
So Unix.
And before Active Directory.
All right, so when we had paper, we were good.
Right,
before
right.
Active Directory,
this is
there was
before
NIS.
Back when we had punch
And before
cards.
NIS, there was Yellow Pages.
Right.
And there were similar issues.
This was before IREX, to put it in perspective for the old timers. Punch cards. I remember fuzzing punch card systems with my golf shoes. Damn it.
That's awesome.
I don't know, but I'm in my early 30s, and to date, the submarine that I was stationed on, we actually loaded some of our crypto using punch cards for a while. So
that was probably something that Jeff wrote.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
That's a sad statement on our government.
You didn't have the Kick 13, darn it.
Oh, man.
So,
could we have a second topic?
Yeah,
I
please.
want to talk about
Please,
endpoint
begging.
detection, and in this one is we talk about endpoint detection and response, and I think it's expanding out into endpoint detection, response, and protection. We talked about all these issues that happen once you gain access and gain a foothold. I think one of the goals of endpoint protection is to prevent that attacker from gaining a foothold. Is this a reality in today's world? Are we progressing to the point where we can implement these technologies on the endpoint? Because we all know it's email phishing that leads to an endpoint that gives you the foothold that allows you to move laterally.
Well, that's not a problem anymore because nobody has administrative access on their own workstation.
Well, then there's that.
Oh, wait.
problem solved.
Industry.
Jack drops the mic and walks off.
Before we go down the Jack cynical road, too late, we already did. But I have tested some customers that were able to arrest my C2 channel before I could do anything of any sort of consequence, right? So we do have the ability there, technologically and people-wise, to have that almost zero-based dwell time. It does exist.
No, it absolutely does. I think there's still, unicorns, but there's one organization that I know of that's, the workstations are locked down very thoroughly. They're a profitable organization, so they can put the time and money into figuring out what people need to do their jobs and giving them that and only that. That's a luxury a lot of organizations don't have, is being profitable enough to actually spend the time, which is money, and the money to do that sort of work. So it's possible, but it's difficult. And, there are certain industries and certain verticals and certain strata in those industries. One that's easy is kind of the mid-tier financials are big targets, but they're not monoliths and hard to move. They tend to have, they're all over the place, but it's more likely that the big regional bank does things well, for example. Because they're not so big they can't manage it. They're not doing so much merger and acquisition that they can't control it, but they're profitable and heavily regulated, so they do it well. That's one that's, it's a broad, painting with a broad brush, but, there are places where that works. There are other high-profit industries where it makes sense, high-profit, high-target. Others that are in, commodity industries, it's really hard to justify that money until you're compromised, and we go back to I told you so budgeting.
So many companies that I've spoken to this year are really messaging on the points of how do we help the SOC analyst detect the threats and respond to them sooner and with the best information. Is that a valid strategy? Can this be accomplished today? And how does that help us be more resilient to both pen testers and attackers?
Like a lot of things, I see two directions on that. One is by saying that means I get to blame you, the SOC analyst. It's your fault because we gave you the tools, but we didn't really, and we didn't give you the authority to actually follow through. Others actually are really trying. They're like, oh, how many alerts do you get a day from this system? Oh, well, no wonder you don't respond.
Right.
I turn, I'm an executive and I turn off my phone at 5 o'clock at night because I can't deal with it. And then like 9 before I go to sleep, I check messages. I was like, why don't we apply that to the poor sock monkeys, right? We're like, I don't know I don't have enough context in this environment to know whether I should worry about this. So it depends. A lot of things are blame shifting, but for organizations that are really trying to instrument their environments, I think it's great. But I call me cynical because I am. I don't think enough organizations truly mean that.
Interesting. A handful of vendors I've taken briefings with this year that I'm kind of excited about, and I want to gauge your level of excitement, are trying to provide that
Not
context
much
to the
right
SOC.
now. You want to come sit on Santa's lap and
No.
it'll get better?
I don't. But they're trying to provide that context to the SOC
Right.
analyst. Do you think that's a reality?
I think it is. However, if I walk into your environment with a tool, here's my magic thing. I actually care about you, the SOC analyst, and I haven't considered how it works with all the other tools in the environment.
Okay.
I'm not really helping you as much as I think I am. If, going back to kindergarten lessons, if what I offer you plays well with others, then I absolutely believe that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a challenge we have. It's one of the many challenges in security tools and awareness tools is that if it doesn't play well with others, no matter how valuable the context is, at some point in time, you're dumping shit into Excel and trying to figure out where it goes. And as soon as that's the solution, you're screwed. So I believe that a lot of people believe that that's what they offer, but until we see that it actually really helps you on the keyboards, I don't believe it.
I feel like that's the bar, and I see it even outside of security in our own processes here at Security Weekly. If you're using email or Excel,
Right.
it means that there's a solution that we should be using for that, but maybe that doesn't exist.
Right.
Right?
It's what the world's most widely deployed file sharing system, email.
Yeah.
Right. It's what's the world's most widely fill in the blank analysis system? It's Excel.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What's address book database? I mean, what was it? How many years ago did they go to the million by million, million rows by million columns? Then it became a replacement for databases, and the only real upside to that is it largely killed Excel, which needed to die.
I mean, even I talk about my when I teach 617, I talk about a couple of my uber elite hacking tools, and that's VI, Unix strings, and Excel. It's like, what? How is this even possible?
You were right.
And what do you write your reports in?
VI, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, Word, but
Yeah.
I could write it in VI and then just
you said it.
yeah, I did. I could write it in Excel too, but that's
But I feel like the solutions need to be able to replace some of these tools to feed into a process, right?
Not to be completely cynical and negative, I think some are getting there, but that's one of the things that I think, particularly in enterprise, in large organizations, does this play well with others is a huge barrier that a lot of people get wrong, certainly at first.
Along those lines, a lot of folks struggle with integrating these various technologies that we identified so far. This new field is emerging in security automation and orchestration. That is a lot of us security professionals very concerned when we see the word automation and we see the word orchestration, and we try and understand like how this actually helps us. Do we think this is a valid strategy, moving forward to adopt these technologies that are basically going to help us integrate our technology and our processes together, basically to get away from Excel and email to accomplish goal?
I think done well, it works. It goes back to the fundamentals of system administration, right? If you do a repetitive task daily, then you need to script it and stop doing it manually.
I've had those thoughts. Like I always remember, like the T-shirt or the bumper sticker that says, "I could replace you with a very small shell script."
Right.
I feel like that's the entire industry of security automation and orchestration.
That's the history of Hack 5.
Yeah.
They were working in government, and they found that they could automate themselves out of a job and still get paid for it and do this podcast.
There you go.
That was the old story, anyways.
That's it. There were all these stories that you hear, but if you can automate those things, and the idea with automation and with orchestration and all of these things done well, it should do the things that you can script, program, code. But it should present to you the things that require your personal experience, your knowledge of your environment, and your exposures, your vulnerabilities, your risks, your sensitivity to risk, right? I mean, the mundane shit should be distilled down, and I should put you little tiny pieces of shit on a silver platter just for you. And I think automation orchestration done well can do that. But you can't trust it blindly.
Right. There needs to be and actually the messaging from these companies that I'm hearing is that they're interjecting a human component into these processes.
The best of them are doing that. Like hey, this we all know about. We're going to ignore it. You can always go look at it, but this is, anomalous, or this is outside of the boundaries you've set, or this is a first-time event, or whatever it is. And, done well, which I believe some people do, it's valuable. The challenge is, at some point in time, we have to trust the systems to a level where we really just can't get a clean understanding of why they made the decisions they did. When we get into systems, buzzword alert, machine and learning, artificial intelligence, at some level...
We had to go there eventually.
Oh, my God.
At some level, these things are going to do things we don't understand and can't really get to. It's like, hey, look at this. So there are two approaches here. Look at this, or ask why it presented this. And they're both valid. But why did it present me this is not something we're always going to get an answer to as we automate more and more.
It could have derived the why it made that algorithm from based on your behavior. Some of the technology I'm seeing basically looks at the decisions that humans are making and then develops AI and machine learning based on the decisions that you're. So the AI is learning from us to make even more enhanced decisions, but it's largely based on our behaviors and our own analytics. I think that's really cool.
So to tie that around a little bit, when we talk about the vulnerability scanning and all this stuff, and I remember trying to sell to a customer recently, saying, "Hey, what we really need is we need a vulnerability assessment externally, and we'd like you guys to do that for us." Well, you guys understand that we're the best of the best, and whatever, and they said, "Oh yeah, absolutely, we understand." I said, "You do realize we're going to come in a little bit higher priced?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we understand that." And we came in, and the quote was like, "Whoa, so we got these other quotes from these other places, and like you're a heck of a lot more expensive than these other places were for this vulnerability
10x.
assessment." And we said, "Yeah, because we told you that we're going to do a vulnerability assessment, and we're going to understand what your business is about, and what your customers look like, and all these things that you do, and what your environment is about, and we're going to do some interviews, and then we're going to take the results from the tools and some of our manual confirmation of some of the stuff, and we're going to base that against what you do for business, and whether this is an actual risk to your environment, and then we're going to categorize those risks based on what we know about your environment as to what the tool told us." And they're like, "Yeah, you guys are like 10 times more expensive than the other folks that are just going to run Nessus and hand us a report."
And that's a great example of an aspect of all of this that we're not touching on, and it touches on all the topics, is the vast majorities of organizations out there can't afford a pen test, whatever level it is.
Yeah.
They don't have a SOC. They've got an IT department.
Maybe one person focused on security.
They're not mature enough, and they never will be. And sort of the as an old timer, crotchety, not as cynical as Jack, but maybe more. I don't know.
Depends on the issue.
This whole industry is sort of predicated upon, and I've been doing a lot of shows this year on behalf of Security Weekly and otherwise, talking to vendors. Everything is predicated on the enterprise, the big company that can afford all these cool things.
Yeah, but come on, Jeff, that's where the money is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if we're as security practitioners ever going to advance this whole thing called security, we have to figure out a way to reach the masses, the 99%, in ways that is affordable and it makes sense, and that necessarily entails automation and orchestration. They need to buy tools that can do the stuff, but then they fall into but we don't know what it does. We just want to do it for them.
Or they need to be effective in that acquisition.
Experienced professionals can provide.
But no vendor wants to talk about this because there's no money in the masses. They need to sell their stuff to the enterprise.
I think there is. I think there is certainly. When I've taken more briefings than ever before with the industry as our shows expand.
Sure.
I'm finding I'm kind of playing that, God forbid I say it, the analyst role, right, in evaluating these technologies. There are some.
Next, you'll be an auditor.
I know, right? So some of the vendors are approaching and we try and draw the lines, right, between small business and mid-market and small enterprise, and are there different personas and different challenges in each of those areas? And there are vendors, security vendors, that are targeting those markets, and I think some better than others. And I do hope that we're able to highlight some of the vendors that are helping those in the small business and the mid-market to solve their problems. And I think what Larry was describing was, yeah, there's some automation that happens, but there's also some experience and human intervention that needs to tie those pieces together, because they don't have the staff that maybe a smaller enterprise or enterprise have to tie those pieces together.
And I think that was very much, thanks, Paul, that it was very much there's some automation that happens, there's some great things that happen, but it really becomes the human intervention that happens with all.
So as a segue,
to add to that briefly, I think Jack was alluding to a really good point, and that is those teams that have a very tight integration. Jack was doing it in a cynical way, but I'm going to do it in a positive way. Those teams that have a great integration vertically between their management and their technical teams, they're going to see much more success, because they're going to acquire technologies and acquire expertise in a much more intelligent manner, and be able to spend that dollar much more wisely.
And that's much of what we talk about on Startup Security Weekly, and addressing that issue that we have in communication and leadership and innovation, and how those tie together, and how so you might want to do a startup, but when you're working in an organization in security, you have to sell solutions and technology and security inside your own organization. Sometimes you have to sell a process, right? What we talk about is security being a process. Sometimes you got to go sell that to your organization, and we talked a lot about technologies. But what Geoff's bringing up is a lot of security fundamentally is really about communication and process, and you might have to sell that.
Which sort of ties into the other topic that you mentioned, is the whole idea of training and education.
Yep.
If more companies and more individuals that are responsible for security, or just the technology in their companies, had a more foundational knowledge of security, that they knew what they were getting into, they knew the limitations of the technology that they can afford to employ, they're better equipped, as they're being inundated with all the different technologies that they must have, or they should have, or they could have, and they make more sense of, well, what is it we're trying to do? What is it we're trying to accomplish? What do we have to do? What do we need to do? What would we like to do? And to me, it just makes the whole training thing is not only learning the technical skills, but also understanding the context, so that you become a more informed consumer.
Well, and I think you're one of the, and I kind of differentiate it, right? You're learning about some of the problems that we know about, that we need to solve, and some unique ways in which you could solve those problems. The education piece that for me is somewhat more interesting is, what about those problems I don't know I have? How do I learn about those? How do I get trained up on those? And then how do I seek out and evaluate solutions that fit my organization?
You hire a pen testing company,
you can do that.
They tell you the 500 things that are wrong with with your organization, and you don't address any of them, because you're like, wow, you're so overwhelmed. Or you just run a scanner and find out all the problems.
Michael Santorcangelo framed it best. He said, you have to fall in love with the problem and fall in love with the solution. And sometimes we talk about problems that we didn't know we have. So you got to have that conversation to make people kind of fall in love with the problem. Like, oh, like Active Directory, like, really didn't know I had that. That's some of the value of a pen test. Like, I didn't know I had that problem. It helps you fall in love with the problem. Then you go to find a solution that you fall in love with as well. And every vendor has their unique point of view on that solution, and which one should you choose. And that's part of your security training and education kind of awareness, which was an interesting aspect that I kind of delved into this year that I thought was really interesting. So I know we're running a little short on time. I thought it was a fantastic discussion, by the way.
Agreed.
If you have feedback, please send it to us. As I said before the show, I was telling some of the hosts that we've got a series of 12 webcasts that we're doing next year. We've got another series of 6 webcasts that will be run on demand that will largely cover the topics that we talked about in this segment. If you feel strongly,
and then some.
And if you feel strongly about topics or want information, please reach out. We'll be reaching out to our audience with a survey as well to make sure that we're hitting on the topics that you want to learn about. And as we end the show, Larry's going to take us out, and Geoff is going to make some Vegemite.
Yeah,
whatever that is.
We're going to wrap to another segment for Geoff to do Vegemite
for a live audience.
For a live audience. But with that, over and get the heck out.
Over and out.